Okay, so we were talking about bonding in the last chapter, and we talked about ionic bonding in the last class, and let's move towards the covalent bonding in today's class, right? And I think you are all well aware about what is covalent bonding because it was a part of O-levels stuff as well. So this is covalent bonding, which is actually the bond between non-metals. So you can say that it is actually bond between non-metals, right? It is a bond between non-metals, and you can say that the non-metals may be same and the different as well. And it is actually mutual sharing of electron. This is actually mutual sharing of electron. Mutual sharing means the same number of electrons will be shared from both sides, right? You need to keep remember this, that this is actually mutual sharing of electrons. The same number of electrons will be shared from both of the sides, right? So if you talk about the very basic structure of covalent bonding, so just look at over here. If we talk about hydrogen, so we know that we just have one electron in hydrogen, right? So when hydrogen needs to complete its duplet, so it requires one more electron, so it can share that electron with the second hydrogen, which also have one electron. So these two electrons are going to be shared between two non-metals, and in this way hydrogen shares its electron with a second hydrogen, and they will form what? Hydrogen bond and a hydrogen molecule, right? So this is what hydrogen single bond, and this is actually a single covalent bond, and by this hydrogen molecule is going to be bond and formed, right? You can see this, how many electrons are involved in bonding. Electrons involved in bonding, we have two electrons over here that are involved in the bonding, right? And there is no unbonded electron in this structure. There is no unbonded electron in this structure, no electron which is unbonded. We just have one electron in hydrogen, and that electron is going to be bonded with the second hydrogen, which also have only one electron, right? And you must need to know one very important note over here, which is actually what? The number of electrons required. The number of electrons required is actually the number of electrons shared, right? You need to keep remember this, that जितने electrons चाहिए होंगे उतने ही electrons आपके पास shared होंगे. The number of electrons required are actually is equal to the number of electrons shared, right? This is a very basic definition of the electrons share over here. So if we talk about the second definition, which is actually, or second structure, sorry, for chlorine, so you can see this, we have 7 electrons in a chlorine atom in the last shell. Talk about the last shell, so we have 7 electrons in chlorine, and chlorine will be 17 electrons having first 2, then 8, then 7. So the last shell, in the last shell we have 7 electrons. So how many electrons more required by this chlorine? Only one electron, outer shell electrons, right? Or outer shell, right? आखिरी shell में 8 इलेक्ट्रॉन होने चाहिए, सिर्फ इसको एक चाहिए, जो जितने चाहिए उतने ही शेयर करेगा. एक चाहिए तो बस एक शेयर करेगा, right? So the 6 will be out of the bonding, only one is going to be shared to complete its 8 electron, right? But is that clear? So in this way, chlorine bonded with the second chlorine, and it will form what? Chlorine molecule. Is that right, bacho?
Yes, sir.
Now the thing is, how many bonded electrons over here? If you talk about bonded electrons, so we just have 2 electrons that are involved in bonding. But if you talk about unbonded electrons, bacho, so each chlorine having 17 electrons, and out of which only one is involved in bonding and 16 are not bonding over here. So each chlorine having 16 electrons that are unbonded. So if you talk about 2 chlorines, so we have 32 electrons that are unbonded. Is that right, or not?
Yes, sir.
And if you talk about hydrogen chloride, so we know that 2 different nonmetals can also bond together. So hydrogen chloride, so you can see this, hydrogen has only 1 electron. So it will share 1 electron to complete its duplet, and chlorine has 7 electrons in the outermost shell. To complete its octet, it must need to share that electron to be stable, right? So in this way, HCl is going to be formed, which is actually a molecule. And if you talk about bonded electrons, so we have 2 electrons that are bonded over here in this structure. And if you talk about unbonded electrons, but so only 16 electrons from chlorine are unbonded. Is that clear, every one of you?
Yes, sir.
One more very important definition, Bacho, is that, for example, if you talk about the structures that have multiple atoms, right? So you can say that the element with less number of atoms, or you can say that the element with greater number of electrons to share, right? Greater number of electrons to share will be in the center, right? So you need to keep remember this, the element with the less number of atoms or having greater electrons to share are going to be in the center, would be in the center. So what I'm going to say, what I'm trying to say, but so I am trying to say that, for example, if you have an example like a CH4, or if you are having an example of NH3, so but so in this you can see this that we have 2 different non-metals over here, but the atom with but the element with less atoms is actually carbon, or you can say that carbon has the electronic configuration which is 2,4, and hydrogen having electronic configuration which is 1 only. So hydrogen needs to share only 1 electron, and carbon needs to share its 4 electrons. So the atom with greater number of electrons to share will be in the center, right? So carbon will be in the center, and its 4 electrons will be like this, and 4 different hydrogen will be like this to share each hydrogen 1 electron with the carbon. So it will be like this, that carbon bonded with hydrogen over here, over here, over here, and over here. And the same condition with ammonia as well. We have 1 atom of nitrogen and we have 3 atoms of hydrogen. So the nitrogen have 5 electrons in the outermost shell, and it needs to share 3 electrons, right, to complete its octet. And hydrogen has only 1 electron to share. So over here, hydrogen, hydrogen, and hydrogen. So the atom with greater number of electrons to share would be in the center, right? So in this way, nitrogen will be in the center and bonding with 3 different hydrogens to form what? Ammonia molecule, and over here, methane molecule. Is that right, Bacho?
Yes, sir.
If you talk about the bonded electrons, Bacho, if you talk about the bonded electrons, you can see this, each bond having 2 electrons, right? Each bond is formed by the mutual sharing of 2 electrons from each side. So you can say that we have 8 electrons over here that are involved in bonding. And if you talk about unbonded electrons, so we just know this, that hydrogen has only 1 electron. हाइड्रोजन के पास तो सिर्फ एक ही इलेक्ट्रॉन है ना, तो वो उसने तो शेयर कर लिया, तो हाइड्रोजन के पास कोई भी अनबॉन्डेड इलेक्ट्रॉन नहीं बचा. बट इफ यू टॉक अबाउट कार्बन, सो वी नो दैट कार्बन हैज 6 इलेक्ट्रॉन्स. लास्ट शेल के 4 इलेक्ट्रॉन बॉन्डेड हैं, और ये वाले जो अंदर वाले शेल के 2 इलेक्ट्रॉन्स हैं, दे आर अनबॉन्डेड. सो अनबॉन्डेड में आपके पास इस पूरे स्ट्रक्चर में सिर्फ 2 इलेक्ट्रॉन है. इफ यू टॉक अबाउट अमोनिया, सो वी नो दैट नाइट्रोजन की इलेक्ट्रॉनिक कॉन्फ़िगरेशन होती है 2,5 और हाइड्रोजन की होती है 1. तो हाइड्रोजन ने तो अपने इलेक्ट्रॉन शेयर कर दिए, सारे एक ही था, सारे शेयर कर दिए, सारे हाइड्रोजन ने अपने अपने एक इलेक्ट्रॉन शेयर कर दिए. बट इफ यू टॉक अबाउट नाइट्रोजन, so inner shell के 2 electrons और outer shell के 2 electrons are free. So you can say that bonded are 6 electrons and unbonded are only 4. Is that right, Bachcho? Clear or not?
Yes, sir.
So I think you guys can draw some structures. What do you say if I gave you some examples, so you all can draw that, right or not?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so let's try some questions that you can draw. But so I just used to name this a skill test, right? So a skill test for you. So you can say that you need to draw PCl3, but right? You need to draw H2S. You need to draw C2H6. You need to draw N2H4. You need to draw water molecule, and you need to draw SiC Cl4, or we can write SiF4 over here, or you can draw CF3Cl, right? Just try to solve these 7 structures. Try to draw these 7 structures and keep these definitions in your mind. And also you need to find out what you also need to find out. You also need to find out what, but so you also need to find out the number of electrons share and the number of unbonded electrons, right? But so just try to solve this. This is what you need to do. Just try to do this, and let me stop the sharing over here. Oh, sorry, let me stop the. Okay, so but let's start with the next level. The next level is sharing of 2 electrons from each side. So for example, if you have oxygen molecule, right? So you need to keep remember, Bacho, that oxygen is having 6 electrons in the outermost shell, 2, 4, and 6. You can see this, that each oxygen requires at least 2 electrons to complete their octet, right? So definitely it is going to share in this way, that all the 2 electrons are going to be shared. In this way, oxygen share 2 electrons with the second oxygen and form oxygen molecule, right? If you talk about the bonded electrons over here, so we know that each bond having 2 electrons, so bonded electrons are 4 over here.
Sir, I can't see your
right?
screen.
Can't see?
Yes, sir.
Oh, it's ended. Okay, now is that visible, Bacho?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so you can see this, Bacho, that we are talking about oxygen molecule. So if you talk about oxygen molecule, so oxygen require 2 electrons in the outermost shell. So if I remove this, just to show you again, if you talk about oxygen, Bacho, so oxygen wants 2 electrons in the outermost shell, right? So it must need to share 2 electrons to have 8 electrons in the outermost shell. So if it is reacting with the second oxygen, so it must share 2 electrons with the second oxygen atom. In this way, both the oxygen share their 2 electrons to each other, right? In this way, oxygen molecule or oxygen gas is going to be formed, right? If you talk about the bonded electrons over here, but so each oxygen share 2 electrons. The bonded electrons are 4 over here. Bonded electrons are 4, right? And if you talk about unbonded electrons, but so unbonded electrons, how can we find it out? We know that oxygen का proton number is 8, right? So इसमें से 2 electrons ने share किए हैं, तो 6 electrons are still unbonded from each oxygen. So 2 oxygen के होगा 6 and 6, 12 electrons. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Then if you
Yes,
talk
sir.
about carbon dioxide, so you can see this, that the atom with the less number would be in the center. So carbon would be in the center and 2 oxygen over there, right? And we know that carbon has 4 electrons in the outermost shell. If you talk about carbon, 2, 4, and it requires 4 more electrons. So carbon needs to share all its electrons, and we have only 2 atoms over here. So definitely 2 electrons over here and 2 electrons over here, right? And we know that if you talk about oxygen, so oxygen is 2, 6. So oxygen requires 2 electrons in the outermost shell. So definitely oxygen is going to share its 2 electrons, and 4 electrons would be outside the sharing of last shell, right? So it will be like this. So you can say that carbon share 2 electrons with oxygen over here and share 2 electrons over here with this oxygen as well. So if we talk about bonded electrons, so bonded are actually 4 and 4, 8 electrons over here. And if you talk about unbonded, so we know that each oxygen having 6 unbonded electrons, so 2 oxygen having 12, and carbon has 2 unbonded electrons. So 14 electrons are unbonded over here. What do you say, Bacho? Is that right or not?
Yes, sir.
That's right. Okay, that's very good. That's perfect. Now we can even talk about some skill tests over here as well. So if you talk about skill test questions, so these are actually CS2, N2H2, C2 H2, and we don't have furthermore. We just have these three examples that you need to do. And let's talk about the 3 electrons from each side over here as well, and then we connect this skill test with that again, right? Just look at over here. But so if you talk about nitrogen, so nitrogen has 5 electrons in the outermost shell, and if the nitrogen is going to react with the second nitrogen, so it can share its 3 electrons together as well. So 2 nitrogen if just share their electrons, तो 2 इलेक्ट्रॉन होगा बाहर और 3 इलेक्ट्रॉन्स शेयर, 2 इलेक्ट्रॉन बाहर 3 इलेक्ट्रॉन्स शेयर. So even an atom can share 3 electrons, right? So it will be like this. It is a nitrogen molecule, right? If you talk about bonded electrons, so over here each nitrogen shared 3 electrons, so 6 electrons are over here in bonding involved. And if you talk about unbonded, so 4 electrons from each nitrogen are not involved in bonding, so 8 electrons are unbonded over here, right? So you just need to keep remember कि एक ही जगह पर या तो एक इलेक्ट्रॉन शेयर हो सकता है, या तो 2 हो सकते हैं, या तो 3 हो सकते हैं, राइट? अलग अलग तो 4 भी हो सकते हैं, जैसे अभी आप लोगों ने किए हैं यहाँ ऊपर CH4 में अगर आप देखें तो यहाँ पर 4 इलेक्ट्रॉन भी शेयर हुए हैं. एक कार्बन में 1 2 3 4 बॉन्ड बनाए हुए हैं, बट एक साथ मैक्सिमम 3 इलेक्ट्रॉन्स शेयर हो सकते हैं, जैसे कि अभी हमने किया है यहाँ पर नाइट्रोजन ट्रिपल बॉन्ड. अब ऐसा नहीं हो सकता कि कार्बन को 4 इलेक्ट्रॉन चाहिए तो वो 4 बॉन्ड बना लेगा दूसरे कार्बन के साथ. दिस इज नॉट पॉसिबल. एक साथ मैक्सिमम 3 शेयर हो सकते हैं. इज दैट क्लियर टू ऑल ऑफ यू?
Yes.
Now you just need to draw these 3 structures and 2 more structures, which are actually C2, H2, and HCl. These are the maximum structures that you need to draw. Just try it again and send me the picture so I can check you are drawing right or not.